Good morning and welcome to Fridays with Foster. I am your host, as always, Foster McCarl, and got to come up with a better tagline or some tagline, which would be the show where the topic changes every week. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's true. So that's the most important thing. It's true. Um, so today we are going to be talking about delegation. I'd say the art of delegation, but it's actually more of a science when it comes to delegation. um, but first things first, today I decided to go on the lighter side of the coffee, and this is Chiaro. And eventually I'm going to be breaking out of an espresso. I think I'm getting a bird grinder this week so I can start getting some whole beans back in my life. So Chiaro is a quote inspired by the baristas of Brooklyn. Who knew? I didn't know Brooklyn had a special group of baristas that we're looked up to. And they value the natural sweetness of coffee and apply a light roast to protect it. We carefully selected Arabicas from Kenya and Indonesia to develop this smooth blend that reveals its natural caramel and sweet biscuit notes when combined with milk. So today, I actually have a latte, and we'll see what the taste is. It's supposed to be really light, so it's probably going to be more like a milkshake than a coffee, which is fine. It's good. I'm used to a little more of a kick, but that's okay. So anyway, so what I'm looking at today is trying to figure out how I can help people with my experience dealing with delegation. I have a lot of clients that I work with, and and being a parent too, delegation is difficult at times. But I've got a lot of clients that have people that are seemingly capable, and they are simply not doing what they're supposed to do, and they're not following through with what they need to follow through with, and it gets frustrating with them. So um, good morning, Dad, watching, Foster James McCarl. Appreciate him being here. I'm sure he's got a lot of stories of attempted delegation to me growing up and otherwise in his work. Um, a couple quotes that I really like before we jump into this. First is from Dwight Eisenhower. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do what you want done because he wants to do it. I'll read that again. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. And this one's actually from my wife. She'll appreciate this. This is from Sandra Day O'Connor, former Supreme Court Justice. The really expert riders of horses let the horse know immediately who is in control, but then guide the horse with loose reins and seldom use the spurs. So let's translate that into business. The um, the first one, obviously, that with Eisenhower, that quote's great, and I think represents a lot of what people want to see done, but what happens is they don't get buy-in from the individual, right? So they want to delegate something, and that's the last line because he wants to do it. They have difficulty with that because they don't end up really wanting to do it. They don't see how it's part of their cause. People are often talking about the millennial generations and their need to have passion and things like that and purpose in the work, and they don't attach the work to the passion. But I really think that's anybody. I don't know that. I think everybody's raised a little differently. We'll talk about generational leadership on another show, but and the differences therein. But what I look at is the idea of helping somebody understand how their behaviors are going to directly contribute to specific outcomes that everybody wants. The second quote by Sandra Day O'Connor, I think, is wonderful because people often do the reverse in leadership. So I'll read this again. The really expert riders of horses let the horse know immediately who is in control, but then guide the horse with loose reins and seldom use the spurs. I see a lot of owners out there that are only spur. All they do is use spurs. And from the beginning of the relationship, they haven't necessarily let the team member know who is in control. And I see it all the time when people have maybe a direct report or a manager in a position, and because they don't see that they're effectively leading another team member, they actually will jump right in front of that manager and start leading the individual themselves, which completely cuts the legs off the manager themselves. So who really is in control? Well, obviously the person at the top, the CEO who's suffering from CEO wake, is at the top and sees those issues uh, right up front when people do or don't do things as they would like to have done because they're the CEO. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the individual that they're trying to lead has buy-in. Just read a great article in Harvard Business Review by Sabina Nawaz, and it's called a delegation, or you're delegating, it's not working, here's why, which is awesome. And so she gives four kind of examples that I think are important from this perspective of a CEO. So first, the first reason why delegation doesn't work, she talks about a lack of critical thinking. And really what this simply comes down to, and so if you're listening to this and you want to actually learn and apply this, think about the people that are not doing what you want them to do after you think you've told them exactly what needs to be done for the 10th time. And those are your words, probably not my. How many more times do I have to tell you, right, how to do it? So first is critical thinking. So usually what happens is that the owner or the leader will actually do it for them, or they'll do a very important part of the process for them, thereby releasing them from the need to have any kind of critical thinking. One simple example of this is when an owner comes up from a technical background. So if I've worked with a lot of HVAC clients and other construction professionals, they have a certain level of experience that they've come up with. So they have all the answers. What they end up being for their individuals and their management teams and otherwise down the line, and even technicians, they become a full-time service call center. So when they have a problem, somebody has a problem, they call the owner. The owner has the answer, so he tells them, right? So they're doing this thing for them, and they're removing the necessity for them to have any kind of critical thinking, which is damaging because then they don't have to do it themselves. A great book for this aspect is the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. Everybody's heard the 1 Minute Manager, but the follow up to that, the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, is great. It's about making sure people actually take care of their side of the street instead of just throwing stuff on you. And it's a tough thing to work out of if you're an owner. Don't jump in and give them the answers. Sidebar to that, what I do in those situations when people do continuously call for the answers to the owner or to the leader themselves is I have them answer with one phrase always, and it's a question. Give me, first it starts with the statement, give me two options and which one do you think is best, and call me back. And then eventually they stop calling because then they actually start thinking through it themselves. Okay, the second um, uh, aspect of delegation that's lacking in the process that's talked about by Sabina is the lack of initiative. So people don't have initiative. They're not following up properly with you, or a lot of times with delegation, we wait until a day before it's due and or the deadline, and then we check in and realize that it's not happening. There isn't this ongoing communication. And a lot of that is because it's in design. And we'll talk about this in my, I've got a 4-step delegation process. This is one of those steps where we talk about communication, right? And how we help build that level of accountability within there. The third thing that's lacking from the delegation process here is the lack of quality. So part of it is the opposite of perfect is the enemy of done. A lot of times people want to get things done real quick, but there's no quality there. And part of the issue there is there's no real measurement for that. That's what she talks about. Is there, what is quality? Quality according to who? According to the CEO? Well, who's going to do it better than the leader if the leader has expertise in that area? Well, nobody. So it's about changing your frame of mind and having them understand how quality is measured for you. And then the last one that's lacking in this process of delegation, according to Sabina Nawaz, is the lack of speed. And what she talks about is something really interesting. It's actually called CEO time. And CEO time is one of two things. Number one, it's where the CEO themselves can actually do something that they're delegating faster than the person can do it themselves to start. The second, and probably more damaging, is where the CEO thinks that they can do it faster than the individual. So they don't actually relinquish that, right? So the expectations of how long it will take are sometimes skewed from the experience of the owner or the leader and the individual on their team that they're trying to delegate to. And the biggest issue here that I see, just as a sidebar to this, is when we really sit down and look at the amount of time that it takes. The one thing I hear again and again is it's faster if I what? Just do it myself. Okay, so you do it yourself, it takes 10 minutes instead of taking 30 minutes to train somebody on it today. So today it takes 10 minutes, then tomorrow it takes another 10 minutes, then the next day it takes another 10 minutes, and then you're 4 hours in after a few weeks, right? Of doing it every day because it's faster if I do it myself. What they're not doing is they're not qualifying the actually or quantifying the actual time it's going to take on a longer spectrum. So when they look at the long term and look at a longer timeline, it may be a little more upfront time right now, but then they will not have to do it again in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But they don't think about it like that because they're in the moment right now. So it becomes difficult to delegate. So Foster's 4 steps for the delegation process. Again, I have no new mousetraps. This is just a different way of thinking of things and trying to measure and process things. Then I use this with clients all the time. So first, the first step in proper delegation is have a communication of the expectations and the goals and agree on them. Okay. What that means, right? A communication. That doesn't mean I'm sending you an email that this is what has to be done and here's what it has to be done by. That's not communication, right? So what communication is actually having a conversation with somebody about this process, right? Talk to somebody about what it is that you want, answer questions about it, make sure they understand the impact, make sure they understand the implications of them not doing this, not necessarily them not doing it, but if this initiative does not get carried through, do you see how we can measurably track how it affects our profit margins, how it affects profitability, how it affects customer service? All of these things really need to be part of that process. And you're right, Dad. So 1 + 1 = 3, right? How can we make sure that that what we're doing is garnering a better result instead of just following through the paces? If we don't understand that goal and the individual that you're trying to delegate to doesn't truly buy into that, it's really going to be difficult for them to pick it up when they're not in your office. I often say it's easy to be holy in church. Well, delegation's real easy while they're sitting there in front of you. But what happens when they leave the office, right? So the first step, number 1, communicate the expectations and goals, and then get agreement on that from both sides. Number 2, give them the tools to succeed. Well, what does that mean? Sometimes it actually means physical tools, right? It could be a piece of software. It could be a new computer or a tablet or something that they need to carry with them if they're on the road. It could be an actual physical tool, like a laser cutter, something of that nature, that is going to help that job get done efficiently and get done with a certain level of quality. Sometimes the right tools to succeed means more people. Means if they're going to follow through with this, they need another person to assist them within the engineering field. It means that they need an assistant. It means that they need somebody to assist with sales. Those are all tools that can be used in order to achieve the goal that was agreed upon in step 1. Okay, so step 2, give them the tools to succeed. Step 3, this is great. Sometimes we give people tools and then what do? Good luck. And then we turn around and walk away, keep the same timeline for the goal that we talked about in the first step. The number 3 is give them the education and the training necessary to use the tools. Giving somebody a person to help them with work doesn't mean that they're going to know how to properly manage or lead them, for one. And if you don't set them up to try and help them with that, then they're going to have 2 problems. Number 1, they don't really have the tools themselves to complete the job or do what you are trying to delegate to them. And at the second time, they have somebody now that they don't know how to properly lead, right? They don't have the management experience on how to properly utilize this person to help them with that. So you've actually just added a problem. On the other side, you could have an initiative that's brought through maybe that really requires a brand new software platform. And they're going to need a week or 2 to get proper training on that platform. If you just throw it at them without actually specifying what needs to be done and why and how with that software and give them time to learn that, then it's going to become part of the problem and not part of the solution. Okay, so number three, again, give them the education and training to use these tools. Number four, this is the big one. It's the A word. People don't like always talking about that, but the A word is accountability. Well, what's that mean? Most people think accountability is some negative lashing, if you will, of what do I do when somebody doesn't follow through? Well, accountability is really a process, okay? Accountability to me is not lashings when things don't get done. Accountability is a framework, okay, where we actually utilize scoreboards, KPIs, tracking, and meetings to help make sure that the first three steps are being done. So I mentioned earlier when referencing the article in Harvard Business Review that we would talk about this communication, right? And the having initiative from the individual. If you give somebody a deadline, even if you make a SMART goal and they've got that, the last part of SMART being the T and the time sensitive goal, but you don't check in with them in certain levels of benchmarking um, space. So you might have like five different goals within one larger goal. And if you're not checking out with them and have a timeline associated to those intermediary goals, then you don't find out till a couple days before it's due that it's not done, or it's not done up to the quality you want, or they may run into problems. I know it seems silly, but it happens all the time. Here's where you get, here's what we need to have done, here's the deadline to do it, and then you walk away and then you don't talk to them for another 3 weeks and you wonder why there's a problem there, right? So for accountability, what we like to do is we like to set up a specific timeline and a calendar, break down that main goal into smaller action steps. What needs to get done, when does it need to get done by, and then how are you as the leader going to assist them with that process? And this seems silly and simple, but you need to have regular meetings focused specifically on what you're delegating. It doesn't always work to mush it all in together into, well, that will make that part of it. It's just, it'll be a sidebar to our larger managers meeting. Well, there's four other people in that meeting. Why? Just because you don't have the time to sit there and have another breakout meeting for 15 minutes with an individual, you're going to throw it in there with everybody else, which changes the dynamic for the individual because now he has his peers there, or maybe it could be even direct reports there. So a lot of times what I suggest is to have a separate one-to-one meeting, or if you already have a one-to-one meeting set up, carve out in the agenda, every meeting has an agenda, carve out a part of the agenda where you actually have time to spend just on where they are in the process of achieving this goal in delegation right now. And so that way it's less of what they're not doing and how they're not doing it and what the problem is, but how can I assist you in this process before it gets ahead of us? So we always like to say that, trying to get the information up front. If you tell me about the takeoff, I can better help you with the emergency landing. Don't come to me on your way down with one wing on the plane and the engine's on fire, and then now expect me to jump in and help you save the day. Like for instance, as the example would be 1 week before this is all due, now you're going to tell me, by the way, everything fell apart and you haven't had a chance to really dig into it. That's crazy. And then I look at, and what do I say to myself? Yep, that's why I can't delegate to anybody. It just doesn't get done. It's faster if I do it myself. So I want to do a quick recap. So again, when you're delegating, it's not working according to Sabina Nawaz for 4 reasons. Number 1, lack critical thinking. Number 2, a lack of initiative. Number 3, a lack of quality. Number 4, a lack of speed or understanding of speed from the CEO standpoint. On the other side, the 4-step delegation process. Number 1, we've got to communicate the expectations and goals and agree upon them, along with the timelines. That's what goals have. Number 2, you have to give them the tools to succeed. Number 3, you need to provide them the education and the knowledge to properly utilize those tools, especially if it's people and they don't have management experience. You've got to give them the tools to properly manage people. And then last, provide the framework for success and accountability with that. Scoreboards, meetings, regular tracking. And what I will leave you with is another quote. This is from Theodore Roosevelt. The best executive is the one who has sense enough to pick men to do what he wants done and self-restraint to keep from meddling while they do that. So think about that this week. Whenever you run into delegation issues, as always, I'm here if you want to throw out a message or a note to me. If you want to comment in the bottom and there are specific topics you'd like me to try and cover, that would be great. I'm always happy to hear it. And then hopefully in the next couple of weeks, as my wonderful father gave some examples of today, put some questions and comments in here, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go through these conversations. I really want this to be applicable to you as a participant and a viewer. So that's what I've got. Hopefully you have a wonderful Friday, and we'll talk to you next week for our actual, I guess it will be a Thanksgiving check-in. Have a great day.